So, hello everyone. First of all, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, who's the CEO of CEW, which is one of the leading climate think tanks in the world. From your experience at COP, I just have a few questions I would like to get your thought on. So, first of all, again, it's a pleasure to speak to you. Now, I would first like to understand your viewpoints on India's announcements on its NDC at COP and what it means for India and the world, and what sort of resonating impact we will be seeing in terms of policy, etc., on a macro level.
Yeah, thank you, Anshuman. The statement that India has made on the first day of COP26 is a bold statement of low carbon development. It completely changes the equation for India, for the planet, and of course for the negotiations. For India, it's a statement of economic transformation. It's not just a climate agenda, because now everything changes. How we not only produce our energy and consume our energy, but how we move, how we make things, how we grow things, how we make this shirt, how we deliver services. Everything changes because everything has to become sustainable in order for us to get to that highly aggressive target for 2070 net zero, backed up by that near-term targets for 500 gigawatts of non-fossil electricity capacity by 2030, 45% reduction in emissions intensity, 50% of electricity capacity from renewables, and the target of 1 billion tons of absolute emissions reductions.
So, for my next question, like from your viewpoint, what do you see as the policy and implementation gaps? Like when we talk about this transition that we are looking at, these are very ambitious targets. So, in terms of finance and transition, what are we looking at? What are the gaps or possible gaps that exist now, and what are we looking? What do we need to do as a country in that terms?
The setting of the long-term targets sets a direction of travel, but how fast you go along that road depends on, not just the track but the train and how fast the train moves, right? So to make the train move fast towards sustainability, number one, you will need law. I believe that we should now have a climate change law that puts these targets and these long-term strategies into legislation, so that then subsequent governments can also evaluate how they are making progress. Second, we will need institutional reform. It's one thing for the central government to make these promises. A lot of the changes will happen at the state level, and I've recommended a climate change commission for India, grounded in as a statutory body with constitutional authority, in order to serve as a platform where the central and the state governments can coordinate and again monitor progress as we go along. Number three, we will need the financial ecosystem. It's not just about how much money. You can keep counting how much money. It goes into several trillion dollars. Our estimation at CW is that our net zero transformation will range between $9,500 billion to about $14,000 billion in 2015 prices. Now, that's not going to happen unless you have a financial architecture that is entirely geared towards green investing. Not you invest $99 and then $1 you sign off as some CSR activity. Every dollar invested now has to be green. For that, you need a green taxonomy. You need green banks. You need an ecosystem of green bonds. You need the oversight architecture for how these financial flows are going. So that's the financial ecosystem that has to develop. Then we need an entirely new push on the technological ecosystem. I have been serving as the co-chair of the Climate, Energy and Environment track of India's Science, Technology and Innovation Policy. What we are pushing for is not just incremental technological changes, but transformational technological changes. And again, you need an R&D and innovation ecosystem that allows not just the existing laboratories and IITs, etc., to do what they do, but draw in and create the incentives for startups to invest their minds in developing the new transformative clean technologies of the future. And finally, we need a mindset shift in behavior. And we could do that by nudging through carbon prices. We can do that through regulatory diktats and through public campaigns. But unless people realize that if we don't change the way we live, we cannot change the planet on which we live, we will not get there. So the policy, legal, constitutional changes, the financial ecosystem changes, the technological ecosystem change, and the mindset change. That's what's needed.
So, as we saw, like when we look at the media coverage right after India's announcement of COP, like mostly from UK and the US, it has been very negative. It has been very dismissive of all the, like they have termed the 2070 emission target, which is by like research, so it's one of the like path to net neutrality for India, but they have called it laughable in a way. So what is it that the Western media or just the whole Western mindset needs to understand about India's current position from a development perspective as well? Like what do they need to understand? What messaging needs to go through them?
Well, I have a simple message. If you have to follow the science, then follow the data. India's 2070 net zero target means an absolute emissions from India which are lower than the US's emissions or China's emissions or the European Union's emissions despite their earlier years of net zero. And that is in this century. If we count the cumulative emissions from the last century, then it is laughable to even compare India's cumulative emissions compared to what they have put out. So we should compare apples to apples. Let's compare net zero to net zero and say, and ask ourselves who's putting more carbon into the atmosphere. It is not going to be India. It's going to be the US, China, and the EU. And if the media, Western or otherwise, does not internalize it, then we are not following the data. And if we don't follow the data, you can't follow the science.
So far, like whatever has been going on at COP, the discussions around, like particularly regarding adaptation, and there is a lot of discussion around that and resilience. So far, like when we talk about loss and damage and adaptation in particular, which is more relevant for developing and LDCs, what's your take on that? What do you think the direction in which the COP is heading so far, and where would it lead to? An estimate.
There is no question that the victims of climate change are not the culprits. Last week, CEW released a first climate vulnerability index for every single district in India, and we've shown that 8 out of 10 Indians are now living in climate vulnerable areas. And this is not because they've pumped out greenhouse gases, it's because they are at the receiving end of a climate that is rapidly changing. And I believe that week 2 of the negotiations, loss and damage, and the lack of resources to build resilience for the most vulnerable communities across the world is going to be a major sticking point because we've not managed to implement the Warsaw mechanism for loss and damage. So we are now assuming that we can just simply ignore the people who are affected. As I've said before, the problem with the last 2 decades and 2.5 decades of climate negotiations is basically that the rich have thought that they can escape and the poor have thought that they can adapt. And the climate crisis is definitely something that is demonstrating that neither the rich nor the poor are going to be able to escape or just simply adapt on a slow boom basis. It's going to be more frequent, more intense, more of a perfect storm of climate shocks that's going to hit us. And we need the resources to build that resilience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ghosh, for taking the time. I appreciate a lot that you have taken time out of the research and to like help the students understand India's position and COP better. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.